Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany O'Shea. I am the Director of Security PMM here at GitHub, and I'm very excited to meet you each virtually today. A little bit about me before we get started, and I'm excited to learn a little bit about you in the chat. So I have been in security for about a decade now. The last 5 years, I have focused on application security. And outside of my day job, I love to travel and I love to cook. So if you have any good recipes, I'd love to hear that in the Slack channels as well. And I am excited to talk to you guys today about a topic really near and dear to my heart, because I think it's very important that we all emphasize this in our own organizations or our own software development, is supply chain security. So for our journey today, we're going to start with the state of supply chain security. What are the trends driving supply chain attacks? Why is the supply chain important to us? And then we're going to get into the types of supply chain attacks. And we're going to use 2 example attacks to understand how complex these attacks can be and how organizations are susceptible to them. And then we're going to dig into the exciting, the fun part. What the best practices you can do today to start improving your overall security posture in your supply chain, starting with how to secure your accounts, securing your code, and securing your build systems. So, why is the state of supply chain security rapidly evolving? Companies now have to think through one of the largest digital landscapes and secure a wider attack surface, but they also have to think through more complex and advanced attack vectors. And in supply chain security, we've seen that in Perfect Notion. We used to only have to worry about malicious components or insecure components. And now we have to think about how package managers or build systems can also be compromised. And we see in the data that it's really important, because we here at GitHub love open source. I'm a huge proponent of open source myself, and we find for good reason when we look at modern applications, and I'm talking applications developed in the last 5-ish years, more or less, 80 to 90% of these applications are made up completely of open source or inner source code. And when we look at how rapidly the open source community continues to grow, last report we did a year ago, we found that there was 15,000 new open source packages released daily on GitHub. And this is really exciting, because these open source packages, this type of code reuse, is allowing us to continue to propel the digital ecosystem that we all benefit from today, allows us to innovate faster, and really excitingly, from a productivity perspective, allows us to increase our productivities, meaning more value to the world, more value to our customers, and more value to ourselves in a more productive and more efficient way. And the studies show, when we look at companies that have enabled an open source culture, share best practices, and allowed frictionless reuse of code inside companies, we find that those teams increase their productivity, have higher developer retention, have higher learning rates across their organization, and overall have a higher ability to use those benefits and get value to their clients, get value to all of us across the community in a more meaningful way. That being said, the attack surface has adapted to this. And when we look at the types of supply chain attacks we're seeing next-gen supply chain attacks are up 650%. What is a next-gen supply chain attack? These are things that you're commonly probably hearing in the news: dependency confusion, typo squatting, malicious injection of code, compromising a build system. And it's not these companies in the news that are solely being impacted. About 64% of orgs, more than half of organizations, have been impacted by some form of supply chain attack in the last 12 months, meaning we are all in this together. We are all looking for ways in which we can be more responsive and also better secure our environments to prevent these type of attacks as a community. And when we look at where we are in that journey, there's still a long way for us to go as a community. So 45% of orgs, when surveyed, said they're about halfway finished with securing their supply chain, which is tremendous progress from where we were a few years ago, but still leaves us a lot of interesting initiatives and best practices we can apply to improve our overall security posture. But before we get into that, let's think about how a supply chain security attack happens. So the supply chain can be compromised at multiple points. As you can see by this diagram here, there's kind of two main things you can think about as you're rationalizing or wrapping your head around supply chain security. First is the integrity of your source or your source code. And then the second is your build integrity. So you could have accidental or malicious insecure code added into your source code repository. You could have that source code repository compromised and have malicious code injected in there. You also could have a compromise of a build platform or through your package repo, and that could allow them to either change the code that you thought you were producing or inject malicious code and put that into market or put that into the ecosystem to be used. Two kind of attacks that you've probably heard a lot about in the news help explain just the different flavors of what happens here. So we'll start with SolarWinds, a very complex attack that we're still finding new information about. And you'll see in many attacks, when we first hear the news about this compromise, it's really only the tip of the iceberg about what's happening and what the attack pattern really was. So what we know about the Orion code was Orion was a network